Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome you all on behalf of Queen's University Belfast to this special online event, the 4th annual Declan Kelly Teneo Leadership Lecture, hosted by the Chief Executives Club in association with Queen's Management School. My name is Professor Nola Hewitt-Dundas, and I'm the Pro-Vice Chancellor of the Faculty of Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences here at Queen's. I'm particularly delighted to welcome our guest speaker, President and Chief Executive of Fortune 500 company Analog Devices, Mr. Vincent Roche, who will deliver this year's lecture entitled Seizing Opportunity in Technology Disruption. Analog Devices has a long and strong history of working with our colleagues in the School of Electronics, Electrical Engineering and Computer Science here at Queen's University. I know I speak for everyone when I say that we are truly looking forward to hearing your address today, Vince. The current coronavirus pandemic has challenged many of our assumptions relating to society and the economy, with an environment that is both suffering from a shock, but it's also a fertile ground for innovation and disruption, whether in technology or in business models. What has also become more striking is the need for all of our stakeholders in the ecosystem to work together as we manage and transition to a post-COVID-19 era. The importance of partnership and responding to societal challenges has very much shaped Queen's University's involvement in leading projects to expand our knowledge of COVID-19 and also deploying this enhanced intelligence to develop better solutions that will benefit society. This is in addition to introducing new programs to upskill the labour force, particularly those employees who've been furloughed or those who have now lost their jobs. In Queen's, our partnership commitment is very evident in the key role that we are currently playing in the £850 million Belfast Region City Deal investment, where we are collaboratively driving forward projects to foster innovation in key sectors here in Northern Ireland. Just a few weeks ago, the Royal Society issued a report that featured 8 global case studies on successful research and innovation clusters, one of which was the rapidly growing Belfast technology sector. This is an excellent endorsement of the emerging tech cluster in Northern Ireland, and it's also a great endorsement for the work of Queen's. It's recognition of the world-leading research that we're undertaking in the Institute for Electronics, Communications and Information Technologies, a centre that works closely with Analog Devices. This year at Queen's University, we're celebrating our 175th anniversary as a university that has focused on teaching, research and academic excellence. Moving forward, we plan to continue to build upon our contribution to society in Belfast, Northern Ireland and across the globe. This afternoon, I would also like to extend a very warm welcome and a special note of thanks to Professor Declan Kelly, CEO and Chairman of Teneo, after whom this lecture series is named. Declan is joining us from New York City, and we are saddened, Declan, that you're unable to be here in person this year, but we look forward to welcoming you back to Belfast in the near future. For those of you who are new to the annual Teneo Leadership Lecture, Professor Declan Kelly is an advisor to several of the world's leading CEOs and corporations. Prior to founding Teneo, he served as the US Economic Envoy to Northern Ireland at the US Department of State, and he was appointed Economic Envoy by Secretary of State Hillary Clinton in September 2009. Professor Kelly founded the United States Northern Ireland Mentorship Programme, which he still personally funds and oversees. And this programme offers recent graduates from Northern Ireland an opportunity to gain business and managerial experience, working for up to a year in leading companies in the United States in order to broaden their perspectives and their entrepreneurial flair. To date, over 100 graduates have participated in the programme. Professor Kelly has been a great friend to Queen's University Belfast and in particular to the Management School, with this lecture series commencing in 2017 when he was awarded the prestigious Honorary Adjunct Professorship in Management and Leadership at Queen's Management School. Indeed, Declan's generosity of time and his passion to support student development is evident in him spending time with our students earlier today in a Q&A session, something he does on a frequent basis. Queen's, as a global institution, greatly values our partnership with Professor Kelly and Teneo. The format of today's event will begin with Declan, who will give a short address and introduce our guest lecturer. Vincent Roche, President and CEO of Analog Devices, will then deliver the main lecture. After his lecture, Vince will be joined by Declan to take part in a Q&A session. Throughout the lecture, we would encourage you all at home to submit questions for Vince and for Declan. You can do this by completing the question box to the right of your screen. Please do include your name and business with your questions, and I will try to get through as many as I possibly can. So, without further ado, I will now pass you over to Professor Declan Kelly.
Thank you so much, Nola, and thank you for your kind introduction. I'd also like to offer you my personal congratulations on your appointment as Pro-Vice Chancellor of Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences at Queen's. I think it's a tribute to the incredible work you've done at Queen's Management School, as well as your UK-wide leadership in the fields of innovation and enterprise. And I wish you all the very best in your new role. I know you'll be a tremendous success as you have been to date. I want to also acknowledge and thank Queen's University Belfast Vice Chancellor, Professor Ian Greer, for his leadership of this great university and his support for continued excellence here in the Management School. Also, thanks to Joanne Mallon for all her help in making today come together, as well as Gordon Cross and the technical team for making sure we're all online and able to do this extraordinary event through the use of technology. Technology will be a big theme of what we talk about today, given that we have one of the world's leading experts in technology with us as our guest speaker. Queen's has played a critical role in driving Northern Ireland forward, and I've no doubt that the university will again help lead Northern Ireland in adapting to what I like to call the new different paradigm, as opposed to the new normal paradigm currently emerging across the globe. I just spent the last hour or so with Queen's management students discussing work, life and the future. And I look forward to doing this, every time I get the chance. I find it really energizing. I get asked questions that I never thought I'd ever be asked, and ones that I never thought of being asked before. And I really admire them, and I love working with them. I think the need, actually the absolute requirement for all of us to anticipate and engage with and channel the forces driving global disruption has been a recurring theme in my talks with students and in this lecture since its inception about 4 years ago. And this is before the word coronavirus entered most of our vocabulary. And prior to joining the students today, I'd engaged with a number of global CEO clients of ours in multiple industries, from aviation, technology and finance, who are in the midst of earnings season and in the midst of taking existential decisions in terms of their businesses. And in these lectures over the years, we have repeatedly tackled the primary issues global CEOs must address every day, both as business leaders and increasingly as prominent public-facing actors in civil society. The CEO can no longer operate in the shadows, strictly focused on their industry and their bottom line. CEOs must engage directly with the immense challenges of rapid technological change, economic uncertainty, geopolitical instability, social friction, climate change, the deterioration of international institutions and political governance. And did I mention there's an election in the US next week as well that might be a little bit busy. So in Vincent today, you're going to hear from a guy who deals with all of these things at the same time and does an extraordinary job of doing so, but also has a deep inner passion for some of the things that I think are most important in the world today, climate change being one of them, but I'll let him talk about that. The coronavirus pandemic has brought all of these issues into sharper relief and exacerbating many of them. Business models that have worked for decades are under threat. New ways of working are being debated, are rapidly becoming outdated. Companies with a lot of debt have been exposed. Outdated operational models and weak ESG policies have been exposed. So, amidst the loss of human life and social unrest and economic disparity in the current pandemic, however, many companies, in fact most companies, have shown tremendous resilience and have been inspired to adapt and change for the better. And this theme of disruption is going to re-emerge in the lecture today, but with an even sharper focus on the technologies that change literally how we eat, move, and power our societies, to include here in Northern Ireland. Understanding the trajectory of these changes and how we address them is absolutely critical to all of our businesses. There is no more qualified person, literally, that I know to speak on the theme of seizing opportunity and technology disruption, or any of the issues that I've mentioned, than my very good friend Vincent Roche. Vince has been at the forefront of engineering and innovation for over 3 decades, and as President and CEO of Analog Devices, he and his colleagues are at the absolute leading edge of delivering the technologies that are literally remaking the world. Analog Devices is a company, or ADI, whichever you prefer. Its technologies enable many devices that we use daily. You may not know this, but it's true. And when I began working with Vince and began to know more about his company, it is literally extraordinary when you learn the number of things they're involved in and what they do and how they do them. And he will describe it much more eloquently than I ever could. But it really is amazing. They touch your lives every day in ways that perhaps you didn't know and imagine, but it's quite extraordinary. These things span automobiles, wireless communications, many more. As Vince so eloquently puts it, ADI is a company that bridges the physical and digital worlds. It's a $45 billion market cap company, soon to be $65 billion when its acquisition of Maximum Integrated closes next year. Its technologies measure real-world phenomena, convert that into a digital signal, and interpret the world around us using analog mixed signal and DSP, which is digital signal processing integrated circuits. Now, ADI has a large presence in Ireland and has approximately 1,200 employees in Limerick and 100 in Cork. He is only the 3rd CEO to lead the company since it was founded in 1965. He began his career at ADI in 1988, progressively gaining responsibility in product line management, strategic marketing, business unit management roles during his early tenure. During his career, he worked for the company in Ireland, Massachusetts, and California, and then in 2001 was given responsibility for global sales and marketing as Vice President of Global Sales. In 2009, he was named Vice President for the newly created Worldwide Sales and Strategic Market Segment Group, where he integrated ADI technology into solutions for industrial, automotive, and infrastructure customers. He was promoted to President in 2012, taking responsibility for all R&D, all sales, all marketing, and all business development. And in May 2013, he was appointed President and CEO. He is one of the smartest and most admired technology CEOs in the world, that is for sure. In addition to that, he is a great guy who never forgets or forgot his roots in Ireland. As far as I'm aware, he's the only Fortune 500 CEO who was born in Ireland. He's from Wexford. We won't hold that against him, especially when it comes to hurling season. But he's a passionate Irishman. He cares an awful lot about the climate and climate change. He is a person who really, I'll let him tell his story, but he lives his passions and goes out into the world and experiences them in the physical world as well as the digital world. It's not hyperbole to say that he and ADI are literally in the middle of shaping some of the most transformative technologies the world has ever seen. And as you will see, there are significant opportunities for Northern Ireland in everything that they're involved in. It's my pleasure to introduce my friend and this year's guest lecturer, Vincent Roach, President and CEO of Analog Devices.
I'm really overawed with your eloquent and very generous introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm truly honored to be invited to address this august audience within the hallowed, albeit virtual halls of Queen's University today. As a technologist and business leader, I celebrate the university's globally recognized commitment to innovation, to knowledge transfer, and research commercialization. Your contributions to the fields of health and life sciences and cybersecurity, as well as other sectors, are really, really impressive. And I'm pleased to add that Belfast and Queen's are also responsible for an annual stream of exceptional ADI interns and employees, including one of ADI's vice presidents and 3 of our technology fellows. That's the highest honor that ADI conveys upon its most successful scientists and engineers. And suffice to say, Queen's University's strong legacy and ongoing pursuit of innovation are extraordinary, and I feel really privileged to be with you all here today. I would like to express my appreciation to Professor Nola Hewitt-Dundas, Pro-Vice Chancellor of Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences at Queen's, for her welcome, her very eloquent introduction, and for hosting and convening this event. I'd also like to thank Joanne Mallon and the public engagement team that organized the event, and of course the Gordon Cross and the AV team, without whom we wouldn't be connected today. Finally, I would like to thank and offer greetings to the President and Vice Chancellor of Queen's University, Professor Ian Greer, as well as to the faculty, staff and students of the Queen's Management School, to members of the Chief Executives Club at Queen's, as well as to all others who are joining today from across the industry, academia, civil society, and indeed government. I'm very disappointed to not be there in person to meet and converse with all of you, but such is the world in which we live today, as Declan has described. This time last year, none of us could have imagined how different our world would be today. This is the first global pandemic in 100 years. The waves of economic turbulence and uncertainty it continues to generate, the rapid acceleration of digital initiatives to enable business, education, and indeed life to continue advancing in spite of it all. 2020 will go down as a truly remarkable year. Now, fortunately, digital technology, and in particular the broadband connectivity, computing power, and collaboration tools we have at our disposal, allows me to speak and interact with you in real time from nearly 5,000 kilometers away here in Boston. And it is this digitalization and its impact, specifically on economies and business, that I would like to address with you today. Eric Brynjolfsson and Andrew McAfee's book, The Second Machine Age, frames the evolution of technology and its impact on our societies and economies through what they have termed the first and second machine ages. The first machine age began in the late 1700s with the Industrial Revolution, disrupting centuries of economies built on agriculture, aquaculture, mining, and human animal power through the invention, advancement, and proliferation of steam power, machine, and automation technologies. The differences between the pre-industrial and industrial eras were stark, and until that point, unparalleled. The second machine age, however, which began in the 1900s with the advent of computers and other digital technologies, will eclipse the impact of the first machine age, as traditional economies built on physical assets, scarcity, and diminishing returns give way to digital economies liberated from physical constraints and marked by ubiquity and increasing returns. To illustrate, consider 2 technologies from the 2 eras. The internal combustion engine and the computer chip, one technology powering the cars that propel us down the highway, and the other powering the computers that propel us forward on the digital highway. The internal combustion engine followed a largely linear path of improvements in power and fuel efficiency over its first 100 years. But those improvements plateaued in the last decades of the 20th century as the technology approached its physical limits. Conversely, the computer chip has followed an exponential path of improvement as computing power has doubled while costs have halved, roughly every 2 years for decades. As Bill Gates allegedly quipped around the turn of this century, if GM had kept up with technology like the computer industry has, we would all be driving $25 cars that got 1,000 miles per gallon. Now, while this comment may or may not be apocryphal, the difference between the pace and possibilities of physical and digital innovation is clear. Today, there is almost no industry or market that is not in the process of being remade by digital technologies. Even decidedly non-digital industries like construction and agriculture are being reimagined in the second machine age. A few years ago, ADI partnered with farmers in the northeast of the United States to develop a complete sensor-to-cloud Internet of Things solution that enabled farmers to make smarter decisions throughout their growing cycle of their crops, ultimately improving the quality, economic, and environmental outcomes of their harvests. And just this month, I read that Barclays has launched a £250 million program designed to help farmers in Northern Ireland accelerate their sustainability initiatives through, among other investments, digital technology. And when you look at technology-driven industries like communications, the impact is even more profound. We've gone from an age where long-distance phone calls were a pricey commodity to a time when I can video conference with my kids from the other side of the world on a small handheld device with perfect audio-visual fidelity on free Wi-Fi signals. The democratic spread of high-quality communication technologies is eroding the information asymmetry that has long buttressed the gap between the haves and the have-nots. Farmers now have access to market insights that can maximize the value delivered from their crops. Healthcare services can be delivered to the remotest corners of the world. Disenfranchised citizens in authoritarian regimes have now access to information and insights beyond their borders. In many ways, digital technologies are breaking down barriers and making the world smaller and safer as goods, services, and information flow more freely between previously disconnected trading partners. Not only do they flow more freely, but they also flow to a much broader spectrum of organizations and people than ever before, creating a global web of interdependency and affiliation that transcends our tribes and our country borders. While some political leaders might like to reverse the spread of interdependency, the digital butterfly effect means that market fluctuations in Botswana ripple through Beijing, Bangalore, Boston, and Belfast. Digital connections are both binding us tighter together and freeing us to achieve more than was ever possible before. And now, before you think of me as a technology utopian, however, I don't believe that digitalization is an unconnected benefit to economies and societies. We've all seen massive companies and even entire industries disrupted and destroyed or utterly transformed by it. There is almost no market that isn't threatened by it, especially if they rely on traditional economics based on physical assets and resource scarcity. Companies that are asset or materials based have to augment their operations with digital approaches to avoid the fate of previously market-leading companies like Blockbuster, Polaroid, and Xerox. Harland & Wolff, for example, has had to undergo many transformations to survive. Their latest evolution will require the embrace of technologies and industries that are, in this current era, as innovative and disruptive as were the marine engineering technologies they pioneered in a previous age. And for all our migration from materials-based economies to information-based ones, the environmental degradation begun during the Industrial Revolution has only accelerated for most of the modern era. Fossil fuels continue to provide the majority of the electricity that powers the tremendous numbers of devices and machines that have become part of everyday life over recent decades. The rapid upgrade cycles of electronics and the toxicity of the battery systems that power them has put tremendous pressure on end-of-life disposal systems. But I'm heartened by the fact that we seem to be waking up to these ecological challenges. But we've a long way to go before governments, businesses, and society are coordinated and fully effective in their efforts to address them. I'm really delighted to know that Northern Ireland is in many ways a leader in renewables and sustainability, with aggressive 2030 targets and nearly 50% of your electricity consumption already generated from local renewable sources. You, more than many countries, understand the potential impact of climate change on agriculture and marine resources and the risk it presents for our industries. So taking all of that into account, what does digitalization mean for you and me and our businesses and economies in 2020 and indeed beyond? One of digital technology's greatest contributions to society and business is that it has leveled the playing field in ways that no legislation or regulation ever could. In the pre-digital economy, Northern Ireland's size and challenges in driving inward investment during the decades of the Troubles would put it at a distinct disadvantage to larger, better capitalized regions. But the future doesn't belong to traditional economies, as you are already demonstrating with the incredible growth of your software sector. Digital technology and combinatorial advancements are dismantling traditional barriers to innovation. And the aggregation of Northern Ireland's bright, ambitious, and relatively younger population, stellar universities, and open business environment has created the perfect incubator for tackling the challenges of this new age. Globally, it's never been easier to start and scale a business. Digitalization has lowered the barrier to entry, freed from the necessity of access to substantial human and financial resources. Startups can now exploit an opportunity and bring a solution to market more rapidly than non-digital competitors. For example, Titan IC, which spun out of Queen's in 2007 and was acquired this year by Mellanox Technologies, recognized the market shift from preventative to responsive cybersecurity approaches and quickly brought a solution to market that leveraged high-speed pattern recognition technology to conduct real-time internet traffic analysis. Leopa, another Queen spin-out, spotted an opportunity for visual speech recognition technology in the growing market for more natural human-computer interaction. And these are just two of many Northern Ireland startups that demonstrate the speed with which market introduction and success is possible today. But speed in our era is a two-edged sword, and the price of tardiness is substantial in an economy of increasing returns and platform network effects. In a 1996 Harvard Business Review article, renowned economist Brian Arthur, also from the north of Ireland, wrote about the modern economy's shift in focus from bulk material manufacturing to design and use of technology, from the processing of resources to the processing of information, from the application of raw energy to the application of ideas. And I think that is really, really profound. He pointed out that this shift from an economy founded in materials to one based on information has raised the law of increasing returns to equal stature with the law of diminishing returns, and in many ways eclipsing it. As the total cost of digital goods and services sold is diluted by growth, up to the point of making the cost virtually zero, growth is able to continue and accelerate relatively unimpeded. For example, according to Spotify's data, up to 20% of the songs in its music streaming service have never been played. That's literally millions of songs. But the cost per song for Spotify is so low that having those songs allows the service to serve a larger, hugely diverse customer base and continue with its rapid growth. Now imagine a traditional economy company holding 20% of its inventory in goods that would never likely be sold. The second reason speed is so important today is related: the lock-in power of platforms and their network effects. As digital goods and services accrete more users, they create a gravitational pull that attracts even more users. If you live in a community where most people own a Ford pickup truck, say, you will not suffer any lesser hauling capacity if you choose to purchase a Chevrolet. But if all your friends are on Facebook or Instagram, however, and you choose a different social media platform, the lesser access to your network will reduce its utility, and before long, you will almost certainly switch to the platform your contacts are using. The migration of many software companies over the past decade to open source models is largely designed to leverage these powerful network effects. So speed is of the essence, but the vector of success requires direction as well as speed. There are any number of digital markets you could pursue today. So what I'd like to do is share my perspective on where I'm seeing the greatest opportunity to leverage technological disruption. Before I begin, it's important to frame the discussion by stating that data is the currency of the digital realm. Those companies that figure out how best to capture and monetize data win. In a digital value chain, growth and profitability are greatest at the beginning of the chain, where the data is created, and at the end of the chain, where the data is ultimately consumed. ADI and the semiconductor industry, where data starts its journey, are perfect examples of the beginning of the value chain. The $500 billion semiconductor industry, of which we're a part, underpins the $5 trillion information and communications technology industry and feeds it the data that is its lifeblood. At the other end of the value chain, you find service providers like the hugely successful FANGs, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, and so on and so forth, where data is consumed by businesses and individuals. The intermediate steps along the value journey between data creation and data consumption are being continuously squeezed. Microsoft figured this out, and that's why its storied Windows operating system, which is really merely a means to an end in terms of data consumption, is virtually free these days, while its end applications and cloud data service Azure are growing very rapidly and, of course, very profitably. So with that as a backdrop, there are three industries I'd like to explore with you today whose technological disruption present, I believe, tremendous opportunity for Northern Ireland and indeed the world. So let's start with healthcare. The healthcare industry has been grappling with digitalization for a couple of decades now. The industry's progress and gaps have been highlighted by the COVID-19 pandemic, which has demonstrated the potential and the power of healthcare technology and exposed the critical need to accelerate healthcare's digital transformation. As bad as the pandemic has been, and likely will continue to be, the impact has been far less than previous pandemics due to access to greater scientific knowledge coupled with advanced communication technologies. I'm proud to say that ADI's sensing technology is embedded in many of the ventilators, respirators, CT scanners, and digital X-ray machines that have been so critical in the treatment of COVID-19. For all of the publicity around those technologies, however, digital communication and collaboration have been the real game changers during the pandemic, connecting the world's scientists, clinicians, and companies, and their diverse perspectives and talents to more rapidly understand and tame the spread of the pandemic. Those same technologies have also enabled doctors and nurses to leverage telemedicine to triage and treat a far greater number of patients than they could in person, while reducing the risk of cross-patient infection. While the pandemic has accelerated the digital transformation of healthcare, make no mistake, we were already in the midst of a revolution that is disrupting the entire ecosystem. From medical R&D to healthcare providers to managed care organizations, no one is immune. And looking forward, the transformation will almost certainly accelerate over the next decade. The potential is too great for it to be otherwise. And I'm particularly excited about the potential of high-performance, low-cost electronic sensing to enable greater health and wellness. ADI is developing and delivering molecular-scale sensing and metrology, as well as connectivity and cloud services, to make clinical-grade vital signs monitoring affordable and accessible outside of clinical settings. We're also working on balance and fall detection motion sensing applications that facilitate the benefits of age-in-place care for the world's growing elder population. The common thread through these initiatives is their focus on generating high-quality data that can be used by healthcare providers to save and improve quality of life. Again, ADI stands at the beginning of the value chain. The other end, where data is consumed, is wide open. Will Northern Ireland produce the next healthcare or wellness breakthroughs? I certainly hope so. We stand at the cusp of an incredible paradigm shift where healthcare migrates from a reactive, acute care to proactive, earlier intervention to prevention, where the focus and achievable objective is ongoing wellness. In short, digital technology will make healthcare more accessible, more affordable, and enable a much higher quality of life for all. Now, a second area I'm also excited about is transportation, whose digital disruption over the past decade or so is nothing short of jaw-dropping. The car has become a computer, and the future of automation innovation lies in the semiconductors and software that are increasingly dictating vehicles' performance, environmental impact, and of course, user experience. The future of transportation is autonomous. In an average year, Northern Ireland suffers 9,000 traffic accidents with between 5,000 and 6,000 casualties, the principal cause of which is driver error. Estimates of autonomous driving's impact on those statistics range upward to a more than 90% improvement. Even if autonomous driving only generated a 50% improvement, imagine the impact on those injured or killed and their families, their workplaces, and the economy. Now, I believe, of course, the estimates of when fully autonomous vehicles will be widely available and adopted are overly optimistic, but they are coming, and the autonomous features many of us are already enjoying in our cars, including warnings about lane divergence, obstacle proximity, and driver distraction. They're all beginning to have an impact. Secondly, the future of transportation is electric. The forces of regulation, economics, and environmentalism have combined to create an unstoppable wave of vehicle electrification. Virtually every automotive manufacturer has an electrification strategy, many of whom have targets for electrified vehicles to make up to close to half of their fleets and sales in the coming years. And just last month, General Motors, who built its empire with the internal combustion engine, made it clear that it is all in on electric vehicles with the announcement of the Ultium EV platform. ADI is providing a pioneering wireless battery system that will extend the range and the life of GM's electric vehicles and enable a second life for their batteries. GM is not just disrupting the internal combustion engine, though. It is transforming the whole value chain as semiconductors and digital systems at the beginning of the data journey grow in importance, while traditional providers in the middle of the chain, such as tier one suppliers, are being squeezed out. And we're just at the beginning of this transformation of transportation, or more broadly, mobility. Autonomous and electric trucks, ships, and planes, not to mention robots within our factories and homes, are coming. In fact, according to the just published Future of Jobs report from the World Economic Forum, a full half of all current work tasks will be done by machines by 2025. There are many, many more applications of machine autonomy and electrification, and the data capture and consumption opportunities they represent are really stunning. Now, the final area of disruption I would like to address today is energy, and specifically the generation, transmission, and consumption of electricity. While our energy needs today still rely significantly on the combustion of fossil fuels, the future will look dramatically different thanks to clean energy production and management technologies. The world is waking up to the environmental peril we face and appears to be finding the collective focus across government, business, and society to really address the situation thoroughly. From the first Earth Day 50 years ago to recent government initiatives such as the Paris Climate Agreement and last month's pledge from China, the world's biggest consumer of coal, to be carbon neutral by 2060, things are indeed changing. And when things are changing, opportunity is abundant. The emergence of the smart grid, with its usage of decentralized and renewable energy sources, digital management systems, smart meters and appliances, and of course energy storage, will fundamentally disrupt the energy industry. There is much opportunity within this disruption and transformation, but again, follow the data. Data production and consumption throughout the system is where the real opportunity lies. For example, we're working with a large multinational energy company with a presence in more than 30 countries across 5 continents, serving 73 million customers. Approximately half of their current investments are being directed toward improvements in the efficiency and quality of their service, 30% of which is related to the digitalization of their grid. One of their investments is the introduction of incredibly precise smart meters that can sense minute fluctuations of energy flow and use that data to improve the overall reliability, efficiency, and safety of electricity supply, not to mention, of course, their own profitability. Turning to Northern Ireland, pioneering projects like the Girona Smart Microgrid on Belfast Harbour represent the first baby steps of what is possible in smart and microgrids. But beyond merely being a consumer of smart grid innovation, you have the opportunity to be a producer of it also. So let me close by challenging each of you. Look at the world around us. Whatever can be digitalized will be. Whatever can be sensed and connected will be. Whatever can be electrified and automated will be. You have tremendous domain expertise in end markets like agriculture, manufacturing, healthcare, and transportation, and of course, spirits. Deeply understanding these markets, where the gaps in productivity and efficiency lie, and the potential for digital transformation, is the pathway to creating market disruption and success. As, for example, Dairy Co-op Dale Farm is demonstrating in its sustainable supply chain initiatives. The world today is a more level playing field. You have the same opportunity as everyone else to be a leader in this transformation, but it will take intense and intentional coordination and collaboration. ADI has been able to generate the level of impact it has in no small part as a function of the strong relationships we have built with academic institutions and governments around the world. For example, in addition to our work with Queen's, we work closely with institutions like MIT, Stanford, and the universities of Cork and Limerick to advance the state of the art in materials and semiconductor technology. Recently, we've been working with scientists and engineers at MIT and Mass General Hospital to produce carbon nanotube sensor technology, which, among other applications, can generate a digital Petri dish that can detect pathogens with greater reliability, accuracy, and efficiency than traditional sensors. The primary benefit of academic institutions and businesses working together is that it ensures technology advances lead to commercial applications that can feed back into the academic setting in a virtuous cycle of innovation. In the digital era, population, history, and current market position really don't matter. What matters is skill, imagination, ingenuity, a sense of mission and ambition, things that Northern Ireland has in abundance. What matters is making the necessary moves to seize the opportunity quickly. Companies are emerging around the world that didn't exist 10 years ago, that now have hundreds of millions in revenue and more. This couldn't have happened before the data era. So the world is your oyster, and the opportunity is there for the taking. Thank you for your attention.
What a fabulous lecture. I doubt anybody that is listening in won't be inspired by what they have heard. I'm really pleased for the number of questions that I've already received. So Declan and Vince, be prepared. We're going to keep you busy for the next half an hour. But I would encourage you, if you have any questions that you would like to submit in addition to those I've already received, you can put them to the right of your screen in the chat function there. So can I ask Vince and Declan both, the first question I'm going to start with really is I've been asked to address it to both of you. It's from Declan Cole, who is a senior consultant in Citi. And his question really is around the role of leaders. So as leaders, how have you continued to engage your people during the pandemic? And perhaps linked to that, another question from Niall Parfitt from Atlanticus Digital in relation to disruption. Do you think that identifying or creating opportunities is a gift, or is it a skill that leaders can develop? So how have you engaged with people during a pandemic, and particularly in that area of disruption within this pandemic period? What is the role that you have played or can play in inspiring people to identify those opportunities?
Well, there are two. Maybe I'll take a crack at that, Declan. There are two very, very important and broad questions. On the first one around what we do to keep employees engaged and the methods that we're using, I would say first and foremost, the things that are more routine, we're very capable of managing with virtual technologies, where we have definition of problems to be solved, people are getting on with solving them. I think where you have to overcompensate is to find methods to enable creativity, whiteboarding, the spontaneous combustion of ideas, for example. That's a bit more difficult, and we are working on methods to try to ensure in this work from home scenario here that we are finding ways to stimulate idea creation. But it is difficult. I think productivity is probably in some ways better in using virtual methods. People are able to spend more time focusing on their tasks rather than commuting to work. Things are probably quieter in the home setting, but I do think that the creativity side of things is what's really got to be worked upon. The second part of the question, around what we're doing to enable the innovation process. We are an innovation-centered company. So I would say first and foremost, we expect innovation to take place. It's how we generate value. We talk about it a lot, but we also talk on the other side of innovation is, the execution of the innovation, applying the innovation, and you've got to balance both messages. I do think it is possible to teach innovation. I do believe that it is, for example, one of the great lessons I've learned over the last number of years is that innovation is not a sole pursuit anymore. Nola and I were talking about this earlier on. It is it's a process of recombinant or combinatorial innovation, building on the innovations that have come from the past, and bringing new and novel ways of structuring new ideas with the old ideas in new forms. So I think it can be thought. You can enable it. You can build the systems and the processes to enable it. But it's the old expression. It's, the whole process of invention, innovation, and applying it is 1 or 2% inspiration, and the rest is about perspiration.
Yeah, I'm not going to say much more. I think, Vincent runs a much bigger company than I do. We only have 850 people, but I would say the doing of the work is changing rapidly for most companies in terms of how they are working. And I think we're seeing a bit of generation skipping going on in terms of the use of innovation to sort of leapfrog over what would otherwise probably take a longer period of time to get certain types of work done. Technology has enabled people, encouraged them to basically take risks they perhaps wouldn't otherwise have taken as quickly. And so forms of work, types of work, certain roles may not necessarily even come back ever again. Some of them may be replaced with faster alternatives. And so I do think that those who want to innovate and understand that the nature of work is changing are going to do better when we come out of this. Second thing is, I think the way people think about doing their job is changing, even if their role isn't changing. And so, the productivity ratio is definitely going up. There's no question about that. But on the same by the same token, I think people are really now starting to think about how am I going to do my job differently when I'm allowed to travel around again and the world is going to be back to quote unquote normal. Yeah. And
I'd like to add one, Declan. Sorry to interrupt you. If I could just play off something you said in your introduction. You talked about the role that CEOs have now got to play, leaders have got to play in this new world. My employees, I have 16,000 employees across the globe. And something I've had to do is, play the role of communications architect, far more frequent communications, and, communications that just keep people connected, give people a sense of hope. There's a lot of, particularly amongst the younger population, I think there's, where they're starting out in their careers and they need to be at the side of their mentors, their teachers, the experts. It's quite difficult for them. And there's a tremendous, I'd say, there's an anxiety in general, an existential anxiety around the epidemic itself. But I think we have to overcompensate with far more frequent and different types of communication than we did in the past.
Great. There are other questions coming on in the chat, and so if I can move to the next question, it's around. There's been a number of questions around startups, and I think we'll come to that in a second. It's interesting. Obviously, Vince, your company is a very large multinational, very long history, well established. And even within that context, there's a question from Laurie Montgomery from Danske Bank. So perhaps there's an element of businesses within highly regulated industries. But what are your views around trying to remove fear from the digitalization process, trying to build that into processes within organizations? So building that digital first culture. I'm happy for both of you to address that as well.
Yeah, it's a great question. As I said during the prepared remarks, I believe that digitalization is inevitable. Half the tasks that will be undertaken by the world in 2025 will be automated. So that automation is going to continue. I think if you look back through the last 2-3 decades and you look at where digitalization has it benefited society? I think it absolutely has. I think it's brought connectivity to places where remoteness reigned. It's brought healthcare into places where healthcare was just unavailable. And I believe digital technologies are critical to enable affordable healthcare with a focus on wellness rather than acute care. Healthcare digital is the route to that. But I do think as well that economies have got to get themselves ready for the other side of digitalization. New jobs will be created, new sources of value will be created. In fact, there's talk now as well about reconstituting the way we measure economic productivity. It isn't so much, of course, GDP is important, but it's the virtual effects and values brought by digital information technologies that now need to get calculated too. On the other side is the fact that people are being left behind. So I think it's incumbent upon governments and companies to help out with this process as well of retraining and reskilling people to get them into the world of the digital and not leave them behind. And I do think today that is a source of inequality and a source of increasing tension in society. But we have to deal with that.
I suppose maybe just turning to Declan then. Declan, obviously, your company is very involved in advising and providing consultancy services to many of the sort of the leading Fortune companies. To what extent does digitalization and the embracing of that within their processes, does that figure? Is it presenting challenges? Because it's not all good. There has to be downsides too, and I think we're seeing that coming through the chat messages as well. It isn't always the perception that it's very positive. it may not actually be. It may be challenges as well.
You know, Vincent is by far the subject matter expert here, so I'll be brief on this one, except my only experience is in, you know, we have consulting businesses that in our business that advise on this topic, and I spent 4 hours talking to a CEO about it last night over dinner. I think the bottom line is that some companies do it better than others. Those that are not of the space, so exclude ADI-like companies, you know, struggle with really understanding, in my experience, the speed of change that's required. So they all understand it conceptually that this is important. We need to be, you know, digitally more adroit and do it faster and better. But even in that statement, they don't really understand how much faster they really need to be if they want to be competitive. So digitalization in and of itself is likely to be the thing that could be the tsunami that overwhelms the business if it doesn't move at the right pace. And I find really, really large market cap companies still to this day struggling to understand what that means other than paying lip service to it. And, you know, if you're running ADI like Vincent is, it's a massive opportunity because you want people to embrace it and get it. But also, you know, if you think about, you know, this conversation 5 years ago, most people really didn't get it. And so I think there's a bit of catch up going on. I do think it'll be fine, but there are some companies not doing it as quickly as they should be.
Okay, Vince, can I bring you back to something you said at the start of your lecture? You said that there's almost no industry or market that is not in the process of being remade by digital technologies. And we have a question from Alan Bridle, economist at the Bank of Ireland, and he's wondering, while in some ways every sector is impacted, are there sectors where there is a greater opportunity to capitalize on these new technologies and the changes and opportunities that it presents?
Yeah, I think if you look at where, I mean, technology today is digital technology is well represented in communication systems, cloud services, and so on and so forth. I do believe that healthcare is one area where we've massive tasks ahead of us to democratize healthcare, to make it accessible across the globe. There are many people. Most of the globe is living in a situation, the global population is living in a situation where healthcare is simply really unavailable. So that to me is the area of the need for mass democratization of technology and capability to make healthcare accessible, affordable, and again, with a focus on wellness. I think, to me, that's the prime example. And, you know, as well, one of the prior questions that was asked about, you know, how we deal with innovation. I think what's becoming increasingly important in companies like ADI is that the emerging technologists in my company are far more interested in solving what they would consider to be problems of meaningful social need in areas like healthcare, the environment, et cetera, et cetera. The biggest problem that we faced as a species, you know, humanity has got to figure out how to solve the most complex problem of all, which is environmental destruction and climate change. And technology will play a role in that. I'm beginning to see the emergence of interest at government levels, for example, in the use of technology in the oceans to help us get feedback on the state of, you know, the toxicity, you know, the chemistry of the oceans, the temperature of the oceans, so that we can actually start applying feedback. With feedback, we'll probably take action. So my sense is healthcare and environment are two areas that are very underexploited still in terms of the use of digital and communications technologies.
Okay. Moving on from that, there's a question here. Really, it's around digital technology in changing how we understand the nature of work. So our conceptualization of what work is for individuals. There's a question, are devices replacing brains? From Robert Davey of RDEM. And linked to that, I suppose it's about the quality we have in the chat. Someone is asking about, is that changing then the quality of work for, so we're thinking about the worker here, devices replacing brains, and then challenges around the quality of work.
Yeah, it's a terrific question. Really what digital is doing, in spite of all the hyperbole around artificial intelligence, machine learning, and it's going to take over the world. I think what people forget is digital technologies and computing technologies are at our bidding. They do things typically that are pretty routine, but even artificial intelligence is divining higher forms of insight around kind of linear data streams. I think one thing is for certain. Digital technologies can't ask the questions. We give them the questions to work upon. And I think that's something we should never forget, that human brains are the sources of incredible creativity, and the source also of asking the right questions, framing the problems that these technologies are put to routine tasks to go solve on our behalf. And they do a brilliant job when they're given a clarity about the starting point and the end point. Computers and connectivity systems do a pretty remarkable job at that. But I think we've got to keep, my sense is that whatever is routine, even cognitive routine tasks, are really in jeopardy if once digital technologies are applied. So we've got to find new ways to stimulate value using the great parallel computing power of the human brain.
Okay, and Declan, any thoughts on that about devices and brains?
I'm just waiting for one to be invented that can replace mine, because I'd really welcome it at any moment. Again, Vincent's the expert, so I'm not going to pretend I am. I agree with him. I think AI is fantastic and so forth. I just don't think that it's going to ever replace the human input that's going to be required to make it all relevant. I still believe that at a certain point, the amount of education that you can get from applying your knowledge to things other than those that are in the palm of your hand, technology-wise, is always going to be necessary. So I agree with that.
Okay. So coming back to what I was referencing earlier around established businesses and how that might vary to the experience of a startup. Now, clearly, startups in the current environment is a real challenge. But equally, when you've challenge, you've also got opportunity. But in terms of that adoption of technology, do you think it's different for a startup company? What sort of insights or advice might you give in terms of the way they need to embrace and develop and embed technology within their business?
Well, I suppose, if I look at my own company here, we invest over $1 billion a year in research and development. And the way we architect the allocation of this spend is, obviously, we have a number of things we've got to do to keep our franchise healthy and moving ahead and growing and profitable. We call that Horizon 1 activity. On the other end of the spectrum is what we call the Horizon 3 activity, which is really about exploring new ways of seeing the world. We don't encumber these people with the need to look after the health of the franchise, so to speak. We're looking for breakthrough ideas in terms of markets or in terms of technology. And we then, once they get to a certain level of critical mass, either on the technology, we've clarified the technology picture or the market picture, we start moving them into what we call Horizon 2, which is fast growth in need of continuous funding like any particular product area. So I think, by the way, there is today, when you look at what venture capitalists are interested in, they're extremely interested in new novel ways in life sciences and healthcare delivery, essentially. Those are two areas where there's a very wide open door and a lot of available financing for startup businesses. The other thing we should remember is we're going to be in a very, very low interest rate capital environment for several years. So I think there's going to be, the global economy is going to be flush with capital. I think what's missing is getting enough good ideas out there that can get their hands on the capital. So, we know also that the combinations of many different forms of innovation, I think if you're thinking, for example, around, creating a new healthcare business, you've got to have a level of domain expertise that you bring to bear to be able to define the problems accurately that you're going to tackle. And then you begin to get the various sensing technologies, the material science, whatever is required, the digital technologies, the connectivity technologies, the cyber technologies. I think the environment's wide open, and the problems are, as I said earlier on, I think in healthcare, where there's a massive disruption underway. I think traditional healthcare equipment companies, traditional hospital systems are under threat by telemedicine. These are fertile grounds, and I think the barriers to entry are lower than they've ever been in terms of acquiring capital and using combinations of technologies to solve the problems. What's missing are the ideas, essentially, and those ideas come from the intersection of different domains of knowledge. But for example, we're working with MGH locally here, the vaccine center, and we've been repurposing technologies that we have targeted at cardiorespiratory illness, these wearable devices. And we've started tuning the algorithms with the advice of MGH to get cracking on being able to discover COVID-19 at the very, very early stages of its emergence inside the human body. So I think the world's your oyster. You just got to pick the problem area. And as I said, the capital's there, the technology is very cheap, and the world's your oyster.
Vince, just following on, maybe a bit more of a technical question that has come in from our chief technologist from Thales UK, Paddy Mallon, and it's what is the next technological advancement to allow devices to be used for navigation in the absence of other data? I hope you understand that question.
It's a very, very good question. There are people at ADI much better qualified than me to answer this, but I think dead reckoning is I think the term that people would use for how you navigate without the presence of a satellite signal or a GPS signal, whatever it is. We're using today micro machine devices, MEMS devices that are targeted at automotive applications to keep the navigation on track in the absence of your classical the signal that you use from the sky in some form or other, or from a cellular network. I think maybe 5G networks as well, by the way, when they're deployed, they'll be more pervasive, and because also 5G is supposed to guarantee quality of service for latency and so on and so forth, that will become, I think, a more interesting technology. And the difference between 5G and 4G and 3G and all the other variants of mobile technology that came before is that it is more so targeted at critical applications in business and environment than the consumer. So I think those are the two things at the kind of base level. MEMS devices seem to be, at least in the automotive sector, the most common dead reckoning technology, and 5G I think has a lot of promise. One man's opinion.
Excellent. There's a question in our chat from Roseanne Kelly, who is Chief Executive of our Women in Business Northern Ireland. And Roseanne is asking, how concerned are you that only 16% of employees in the tech sector are female, and how would you innovate to address this?
Yeah, it's been something. It is. I mean, my company too. Women are underrepresented, but we've been taking, a lot of action to drive from my level right down through the organization. I've set targets across the company for diversity and inclusion, and it's beginning to work. It takes a long time to make it stick. We've been about, I think, 3 years in action now, getting our diversity program, maybe a little more, 3-4 years in getting our diversity program activated and executed. But I have found the only way to make it work, words get so far, they dissipate pretty fast in the organization. You've got to put targets in place. And as the CEO, you've got to pay attention to it. If you really want the change, you've got to put the targets in place, make them transparent, and pay attention to them. That's my cut. And we are seeing more women represented at management level in the company. We're seeing this is remarkable and a little embarrassing, but we're a 55-year-old company. 1% of our engineers ever get the title of fellow. Prior to this year, we've only had one fellow in our history. Now that is female. Now we've got a second. So you've got to pay attention up and down and across the organization in all functions and make demands about how to solve the problem.
And I have one last sort of the heavier question for you, and then we sort of will wind up with a couple more easier. I think they're personal questions have been put in, but they're not that personal. You pointed out in your lecture, Vince, around issues around the democratic spread of technology and how that's eroding information asymmetry. And it's allowed us to therefore, the difference between the haves and the have-nots has therefore narrowed over time because of the technology. And I wonder, however, is that right? Because at the same time, we are seeing the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer and the political consequences of that. And is there a difference here in that the democratization is really around the availability of data? The data is out there. We can access so much information on our mobile devices. So there's data and there's information, but then ultimately it's about knowledge, how you apply that knowledge. And is it really a case that we have democratized and provide access to everybody for knowledge, or actually has the technology concentrated knowledge in the hands of a few? And we think of, the increasing concentration and growth of major multinationals in that sort of digital space.
Well, it's a very good and very complex question with I think a complex set of answers too. Well, let's say this. I mean, even today, without virtual technology, universities would essentially shut down. So in many ways, we're using modern communication technology in all its forms, computing and communications, to spread information. I was talking with some of the medics here in research in Mass General Hospital. They're working with scientists in Munich, Shanghai, Melbourne, Australia, Cambridge in the UK, to share knowledge, to pool knowledge, to crack COVID-19. In the communications, they're able to get at light speed. But I think the inequality side of things. So my sense is information is certainly more readily available across the globe. And as I said in my talk, I'm not a utopian here. I have some serious concerns about the inequalities that are developing. And I do think that digital technologies have exacerbated inequality. The other side of the technology is that it gives us access to information to point out the inequalities. So the transparency is far, far greater. But I don't think the democratization of technology has necessarily created the economic inequalities. It's the business of increasing returns. We're now in a world of exponentiality, and those who are able to get into the digital platform and control the platform, like Google, like Facebook, they can, through the process of economic exponentiality, create incredible returns and also control their outcome to a large extent. And you probably saw last week that the US government has taken a pretty strident step, taken a suit against Google for, what they believe to be unfair practices, the unfair collection and use of information. That's the dark side, I think, of the democratization of technology. I think there's going to be a lot more regulation, by the way, across the board, because if you're in the digital world and you can benefit from the digital world, your prosperity has a higher probability of increasing. If you're not in that world, you're in the old linear world of materials, it's going to be a lot more difficult, and the inequalities are likely to grow. So I don't know if that completely answers your question, but I think we have a lot of work to do to put technology to better social use and better environmental use. And I think a lot of that is going to come from companies paying attention to it. But I think we have a lot of work to do to make sure that we can even out the asymmetries between those who have accelerated their earnings, their investment power to use their digital technologies and their closed platforms to greater and greater effect for themselves. So it's a complex question, complex answer that's going to take a lot of work, I think, on the governmental side across the globe. I think Europe has been on the forefront of trying to even things out, but I think we'll never stop. We should be clear. The exponentiality of digital technologies, artificial intelligence, we have to figure out how to use it for good effect, and government's got a role to play in that as well.
Okay, perfect. That's a great answer. Great answer. Last question. You'll be relieved to know, and I'm going to address it to actually both of you just to finish off, because I think you both bring different perspectives from your own business experience. And it's from Dermot Lynch, who is the director of Switch New Media. And the question is, if you could change one thing about your business, what would it be and why?
Ooh, great. Declan, go for it.
I'd probably get someone else to run it. No, I'm kidding. Look, actually, it's kind of an interesting topic for 10 seconds because it may not be the thing you expect. One of the few upsides of COVID, and I don't mean that literally, I mean one of the byproducts of COVID, there are no upsides, is the fact that you don't travel as much. And last year I took 216 flights in 2019. So it doesn't matter what kind of a plane you're flying in, or private or commercial or whatever, it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, the plane goes up and takes off and lands, and it's still a flight. And so when you do 200 plus of those a year, it becomes boring very quickly. So one of the things I've enjoyed most is being home with my family, operating by video like this. There's no substitute for the human interaction, as Vincent said earlier when he was talking about digitalization. I agree with that. But I certainly think from my perspective and from those that work with me and for me and those I interact with, I do think there will be a cutting down of travel in the future, because it's been proven to be not as essential as we thought. Now, if that's 50%, 70%, 30%, I don't know yet. I think it depends on a lot of factors. But I think we've learned to become a lot more efficient with our time. People have become much more willing to accept virtual interaction to get things done progressively without having to sort of insist on you being there in person. And, so the one thing I would change is the amount of travel I do. And, that's from a practical standpoint. Vincent, how about you?
Yeah, good answer, Declan. For me, I think we've got to point our business more and more at solving what I consider to be the most complex problem we've ever faced across the globe, towards the environment. and getting my people more involved in helping to solve that problem, both within the business, but also in the broader society. So I think that, by the way, is the challenge for all businesses. And I also believe that companies are in a very, very good position to, if you like, activate the growing body of opinion amongst the citizens of the world that this is a problem that we've really got to crack, particularly amongst the younger people. So that's something I'm working hard on, and something I've got to work harder on in, the next year, the year after. So to put our technology essentially to better effect in non-traditional areas, but at the same time, very, very critical areas for the future.
Okay, I think we're going to have to draw a line under it there. I do feel like we could talk on for a considerable period of time. It has been really an inspirational lecture. Truly one of the best lectures I've heard for a very long time. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that. Being in Queen's, that's no reflection of my colleagues, but I've thoroughly enjoyed, Vince, your talk and how thought-provoking it has been. We are absolutely in the midst of a revolution in terms of technology, and COVID has been a lens that has sort of allowed us to see the way in which digital, the new tech, not just digital, there are other technologies out there that are emerging, but the coalescence of these technologies, but it's the coalescence of people as well, people expertise, people coming from different sectors, and different backgrounds, and also from across the globe. We do need to work together, and COVID is a perfect example to show us the way that, together, it's not just about developed economies, it's making sure we've got a response that is fit for everyone, that it's ethical, and everyone benefits. So harnessing the technology for the societal good in the future is going to be really important. I think your insight and your homework on Northern Ireland has been exceptional. The number of references to what is going on here really stands out for me. However, I must say I was a little bit sort of thrown by your last comment about Northern Ireland, and really that we were well positioned. We had great, tremendous domain expertise in end markets you referred to. And in those markets, you referred to agriculture, manufacturing, healthcare and transportation. And then you threw away, and of course, spirits. It might have been nice to know a little bit more what you meant by what our expertise in spirits were and how we could develop that. But, thoroughly excellent talk. So, Vince, thank you very, very much. Declan, as always, we are eternally indebted to you and the Teneo team for all of the work that you've done. Again, to reiterate to those who are watching this, that you spent considerable time today with our students, and I've already received fabulous feedback from them. They really value that very open, I think you called it Declan Kelly Unplugged, and I think it very much was that you...
Scary thought.
But they really enjoyed it, and they benefit a lot from that, and your ability to open up, these people like Vince, top leading business people from across the world, to our academics, our wider stakeholders, but perhaps most importantly to our students. You said you're going to cut down on travel. I very much hope that doesn't exclude Belfast in the year to come, and it won't be too long before you're able to come here again. So that just leaves me to thank all of those individuals, all of you that are on the call. I hope that you have very much enjoyed the lecture today. Please do keep in touch with Queen's. Keep an eye on the Chief Executives Club. We have other lectures and engagements that are planned for the rest of the autumn session and into the spring. So do keep in touch. If there's anything we can do in Queen's to support you, please reach out to us. And most importantly, stay safe, and we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you, Noel, and everybody. Real pleasure, and I look forward to being at Queen's in person at some time, and also forging a bigger bridge between us.
That would be amazing.
Thank you, Vincent. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you, Declan. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.